Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy.
Good morning, Tyra. How are you? I just called the, oh my God. Okay, for everyone, I know it's Taina. We were just talking about Tyra Banks. That's why I said Tyra. And also, I have a cold and my head is not working right. Good morning, Taina. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I have mixed feelings about
especially since we're talking about Tyra Banks, I can completely understand why you might have some mixed feelings.
Yeah.
Should we tell people why we were talking about Tyra Banks right before this?
Yeah. So we were talking about Tyra Banks because of the recent Victoria's Secret fashion show where Tyra walked after a long time having not walked and just basically being retired as a supermodel. And the contradiction of that and of her walking, supposedly representing plus size models, full figured models, but also just all the bullshit that she perpetuated about body image and weight stigma and diet culture and all of that in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Full figured and mature, because that's also part of what we want to talk about today was aging, maturing, improving. I'm trying to think of words that we could use instead of aging, but also aging is fine because we all age unless we don't, right? But yeah, so she's there representing this full figured, advanced aged. I mean, she's not that old, but she's probably about the same age as me
us.
and you. I think she might be slightly older than me. I would imagine she's around 50, but still for the modeling world, that is, older. And we were going to talk a little bit about our feelings around aging.
Yeah. So do you want to share how old you are, Becky, since we're talking about aging?
49, coming up on the big 50, which I have lots of feelings about, even though I don't want to. So we can talk about that today.
Yeah. So Tyra Banks is 50. I just looked it up.
Okay, I was right. I thought she was probably right around 50. Yeah. Which is nothing, obviously. And she looks
amazing.
Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. And I had a hard time looking at her. If I'm being really honest, I had a really hard time looking at her and being able to just say, she looks gorgeous, because I was so clouded by all of my memories of America's Next Top Model, which I watched at an age. I was probably a little older than some girls who were watching it and were more deeply affected than I was. But I think for millennials, especially, that show, more than maybe anything else. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot in the running for this. But that show, perhaps more than anything else, made women feel, especially girls, feel really shitty about their bodies. Because Tyra, and then, I mean, even more so, what was her name? The older model who was
Janice.
Janice
Dickinson with the mouth.
The first supermodel, as she has self-described herself. And yes, making these women feel really bad for being quote unquote plus size. And when we now look back at the women that they deemed plus size, and I'm using finger quotes in case you can't see, it is appalling.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I don't mean that in a way of like being plus size is appalling, but that they were calling these women who were thin, plus size, because they weren't Kate Moss thin, they weren't scary thin, they weren't Twiggy thin. And at that time in the 90s, that was the aesthetic. We had moved away from it, but the thing that I think is interesting is we're moving back towards it, and that's very scary. But to see Tyra up there on that runway, flaunting her very full figure, looking gorgeous, and owning it as if she is some sort of like, we should all be
icon.
Saying, way to go, and thank you, and look what you're doing, without I don't know. And I don't know enough to say, has she maybe acknowledged and repented for the past? I don't know. But without, even if she has, it just felt really gross.
Yeah. I have to agree with you there. I think my introduction to America's Next Top Model was maybe, 2008, 2009. I went on vacation to see a friend in New Jersey, which isn't like upstate New Jersey too. It wasn't like wild vacation. It was like, hey, I'm just going to come hang out with you for a few days. And she was house sitting for her boss at the time, and I was staying with her, and we just she had a few days off, and I remember just like staying in bed all day, like catching a marathon on like Bravo or something. And we just got like so into it. And then we were just like, let's just do this all day. Like, we don't have to go out, we don't have to do anything. Like, we can, make dinner and just kind of make it like a pajama party kind of thing. And so I've always kind of had an interest in like fashion and aesthetic. If you don't know, beauty is one of my core values. So I've always just had an interest in things that other people have deemed beautiful, and I'm learning to make those definitions for myself. And so, but I do remember just like there was one girl who made it, I forgot what season it was. Maybe it was like season 2 or season 3. One girl who made it to like the top 3 or the top 4, something like that. Her name was Kenya, and they were on a trip to Africa, to South Africa, doing photo shoots and whatnot. And the way that they had edited those few episodes were just like every time they showed her, she was eating. Like, they didn't show her doing anything else, right? So like the post-production obviously was perpetuating this idea that she was like gorging on food. And then they kept showing shots of her belly, even though it was like, again, by today's standard, she would be considered normal size, like really thin. And they had like several conversations with her about it and how she had to like control her eating and lose weight, and she was getting too fat and this and this and that. And obviously, first of all, this girl was probably stressed the fuck out because it's a competition, and all the pressure that comes along with that. But they also like the way they did it in post-production too was like they kept clips of her like not knowing whether Nelson Mandela was alive or not, right? Like they kind of made her into this villain. And so it was almost like they were equating being fat with like this lack of a moral compass or lack of intelligence or something like that. And so it was a really interesting choice by the producers, etc. But yeah, I'm 40. No, I'm not 40. Jesus, I'm 42. I'm gonna be 43 in a couple months. I didn't watch the fashion show because I just am not into it. Victoria's Secret has never done anything for me, so I have no interest in watching anything they put out. But I did see it obviously on social media, and there was a part of me that was like, oh, I'm happy for her. Like, if she has done the inner work of like deconstructing fat phobia for herself, then I'm happy for that journey for her. Like, I'm happy that she feels proud of her body, that she's embraced her body. Cause I also know, like, I remember when she had her talk show, she was always in the news about like it was always about like what she looked like, right? There were headlines about how much weight she had gained, how much weight she had lost, how much weight she had gained. Like, I remember she yo-yoed for a while, which is totally fine and totally normal as you're aging. Right. And so, so there was a part of me that was like, if she's reached that point where she's just like, fuck it, this is my body and it is what it is, I'm happy for her. But like you, I don't know that she publicly ever apologized or publicly said that she regretted some of the things that she said and did and the ways that she perpetuated diet culture and all of that when she was younger. And so I think you can, for someone like her, I can hear people say, okay, so what should she have done? Should she have not walked? And yeah, I don't think she should have walked, right? Like, if she's done the inner work to undo all that shit for herself and she's at a place where she feels comfortable and happy and, then I think the best thing to do would have been to put out a public statement, right? And say, I'm happy that I was asked to represent this. And I regret, some of my choices in the past, but I think this opportunity is better suited for another model, right? But that's not what she did. And so I think it is a little bit of gaslighting to then come out in such a public way as this body positivity icon when that's not what your journey has been. Like, there's no evidence of that at all.
And what
if
she
there
wore,
is, I haven't seen it.
And as you pointed out, what she wore, she was there like fully clothed, right?
Yeah.
Wearing a cape with sleeves, like a full dress, caftan sort of thing because I'm looking at the photo of her now and she has on tights or leggings that are completely covering her legs. She's wearing this like
corset. Yeah.
That's deeply pulling in her waist. Plus the way the lines are created is to make it appear like her waist is much smaller than it probably actually is. And, you know, obviously pulling her breasts up quite a bit into this incredible cleavage. And it's not to insult what she's wearing or to insult her, because again, I think she looks fucking fantastic. She looks gorgeous. But she's there, the way she's presenting herself is not this like, look at my body. I'm comfortable with my body. I'm comfortable with the way I show up at 50, you know, in a more full figured body, because guess what? As we age, our bodies change. But instead it's more of this, like, I'm going to hide the things that I have always told people they should be ashamed of, try to accentuate those things that I've always told people that they should be accentuating. Right. And it's just like, it still feels like more of the same.
Yeah.
And honestly, the only person, and I didn't watch it either, but from what I have seen, the only person there that represented anything resembling plus size is Ashley Graham, who is a beautiful, full-figured woman. But the truth is, it's exactly more of the same. It's just Victoria's Secret coming back out after like pushing pause for a while to allow all of the past harm that they've caused to kind of die down and hope people forgot. And now they're back doing the same thing with like a couple of token sort of fat people. Yeah. Barely fat, right? Like small fat people. And that's it. And no other kind of inclusivity. I don't think they had anyone there that had any sort of
like
disabilities, any sort of facial disfigurement.
At least visible disabilities, right?
Right.
That were obvious.
Yes. And it, really not a lot in the way of different sizing. And honestly, not even that much in the way of diversity of just simply around like race. It was still a lot of really thin, white, tall women. And so honestly, like, ultimately, I don't even care, because Victoria's Secret is just so fucking damaging and harmful. And Tyra's just part of that. But to pretend like it's anything different is the part that's really frustrating. And I don't want to see people like giving her kudos for now being something that she's not. Honestly, and I respect Ashley Graham as a model, and I love that she's trying to break barriers. So I understand why she's there. And frankly, I don't think anyone who actually cares about equity and inclusivity should be part of anything that Victoria's Secret is doing.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
They need to just go away. Like, for real, go away. Don't go away for a few years. Go the fuck away.
Yeah. I mean, and part of me too is like, okay, you make lingerie for skinny people. Like, if that's what you do, then like, say it with your fucking chest. Like, don't try to be something you're not. Like, that's your history. You obviously have no intention of, you know, going outside of what most brands these days would consider normal sizes. So just say it with your chest, just own it and move on and let it be what it is, because you're doing more harm by trying to say that or trying to be something that you're not.
That is kind of the feeling I have around so much of this weight inclusivity, size inclusivity stuff in brands on the whole. Like Old Navy, for a while they're trying to act like they were going to be this really size inclusive place. And then like after a big splash and having Melissa McCarthy and all these ads and all these things, then like slowly but surely just, oh, well, now you can only get some of the stuff in the store. And then it's like, oh, well, it's all you can only get it online. Now it's all just online. And then they just, even online, start getting away, you know, going away from all of that. Then just don't do it. Don't try to pretend. I agree with you. And to bring it back to aging, because I know that was what we want to talk about too today, that Victoria's Secret thing, you've got a 50-year-old woman as the like wise old woman on the stage. That's the other thing that they're not showing, right? When we're talking about diversity, and this I think is it's so pervasive in so many things around fashion and beauty, which by the way, it is not a strong thing for me. Like it's not a big value set for me. So we'll have two different perspectives maybe on some of that piece, but so much of what I see around fashion and beauty is very divided. It is like, here's the bulk of fashion and beauty, and it is for girls and young women who are under 40. And then here's fashion and beauty for women who are over 40. And what that basically means is here's the stuff to either try to defy aging or to just say, I've given up and I'm just an old lady and no one cares about me.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's this like dividing line, and like there isn't there. You're either supposed to be trying to look youthful. This is the thing I hate about aging. You're either supposed to be trying to look youthful, but then when you do that, people say, who are you trying to fool? And you look pathetic, and stop doing that. Or you're supposed to just like give up and go out to pasture like a cow and like no one looks at you, and shop at Talbot's. No offense on Talbot's, because I own some Talbot's. It's fine. That kind of like, I'm not even trying to be cool anymore look.
Yeah.
And then feel like really shitty about yourself. Like there's just no winning, as it always for women as we age.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a response to that, but I just want to say, like, for clarity on like one of my top 3 core values being beauty, like, I think what I've learned about core values in general, but that one specifically, like, I think sometimes, and I've made this mistake too, it's like buying into what the world calls beautiful, right? And just being like, oh, that's pretty, that's beautiful. You know, I should aspire to be like that or to want that. And for me, what I've learned, it's really about finding the beauty in everything, right? Whether the world calls it beautiful or not. And I think for a long time, I was like, well, I have to be in opposition to what the world calls beautiful just for like principle. And it doesn't always have to be that way, right? Like sometimes what I think is beautiful and what the world calls beautiful can be the same thing.
Before you talk about what I just was saying, and you said your response, I just want to address this because I feel this so deeply. So my good friend, Daisy Gillespie, who does the Unflattering newsletter on Substack, I'll try to link to it if I remember, or hey, show notes. Hey, AI, remember to call that out. And she has a business called Mindful Closet. She and I have had this discussion quite a bit because as feminists, and she's a personal stylist. But also a deep feminist. And as feminists, I have noticed that I have this feeling of like wanting to reject, like you're just saying, all things that have been put on me, all the conditioning about what it means to be a woman, to be acceptable, to be beautiful and all of that. But then I feel like the pendulum for me swings really far the other direction, where then we get to the place, I think that's kind of what I was just describing, of like, either I'm trying to buy into that or I reject it completely, but then I'm left feeling shitty about myself. And it's what I find is really hard is finding that middle ground between those two things in a world that is not addressing it, right? Because I feel like the world around me is also buying into that narrative of one or the other, where I either have to do all the like, I've got to go get everything nipped and tucked and buy all the plumpers and buy all of the like, you know, cool clothing and be a certain size and all of the stuff if I want to be beautiful, or I just reject it all and wear sweatpants and then feel shitty. And it's like, how do I find that middle ground in a world that I don't think there's not enough people addressing it in that beauty space? So that was where I was at with it. And I so feel what you're saying.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is like the color of pink, right? I think unless you're like, you grow up being a super girly girl when you're young, you kind of reject the color of pink because you're like, oh, what that represents, right? Like when you come into your feminist awakening, maybe you reject the color of pink. I know I did, because what it represented was this feminine ideal based in like heteropatriarchal, right? Bullshit. And then as I aged and matured and kind of continued to tap into my agency, right? My power to choose for myself what I liked and what I didn't like, regardless of who or what it aligned with. I was like, I actually like the color pink. Not all shades of pink, but I do like the color pink. I don't wear it, but I like it in different forms, like like I like the way it functions in different ways. And so I think that's a good way. Like that's what I immediately thought of when you talked about like going to like opposite extremes and like finding the balance in between. But I think with aging, I forgot what your original question was.
Actually, it was really just more of that of like, I feel like as women, we either have to be like the fashion and beauty world. I feel like the entire world. So forget the world. I feel like there's this magical cutoff that for women really is, I think, right around 40. And you're right at that age. And I'm now past it, where we are no longer allowed to be desirable, beautiful, whatever word you want to use, where we are no longer youthful, interesting, right? Like we're somewhere right around 40. It's in your 40s, but by 50, as now, I know it's very much done for most of us, unless you are actively engaging in trying to play the game, defying aging. I'm using here quotes like, trying to be youthful, quote unquote, by getting plastic surgery, doing all of the things you grasp at, holding on to what is called conventional beauty. Basically, in your 40s, you are no longer useful,
relevant.
You're no longer beautiful, no longer interesting, just no longer human in so many ways. And I feel like everything around us paints that narrative. And so then you're sort of like, I have found my 40s, and you're at the beginning of it, I'm at the end of it, to be this weird age of trying to figure out, so then what? Right? What does this mean? Like, how do I find my place when clearly no longer part of cultural conversations? Like I want to be. I feel the funny thing about aging, Taina, is the inner part of you never changes, right? Like I feel the inner me, my soul, my being, my essence, whatever that is, has not felt any different for as long as I can remember them, back to being 6. That same voice has never changed. And yet the world around me treats me very different. Right? Like now suddenly, like I went from being protected, right? And like coddled and, when you're little, like little girls, we treat them as these like little delicate flowers, especially little girls. It may be different for Black girls, I don't know, but for little white girls, we're treated as these like little delicate flowers that don't know what we're doing, and we need people to care for us, and we have to be so protected, and we're fragile and we'll die. To then going into like teenage and into your young 20s, where you suddenly become this sexual object that is the only thing you are. You're a thing for consuming, right? And your body is just there to be like given up and to be, who's the best person to have it, right? But you just become this body. And then you start to go into motherhood, where some of us, those who don't have this part of it, but then this next part of this journey, where I think even if you don't have children, I think women who are moving into their 30s and sort of towards their 40s are now sort of treated as these like caretakers, like you're there to help others and to make them feel better. You start to lose, that's where we start to lose some of that attraction piece. Because now we're not seen as sexual beings. We're now seen as like caretaking beings. But now I'm entering this next act, which is getting closer to the last act, which is like, now what am I? Right? Like, I feel like my use to society has ended. And I feel like that Handmaid's Tale, where like, if you've ever watched or read the book, where the young women are there to breed, and then the old women are just put out to like basically die.
To pasture,
And so I feel like the world around me is feeding into that narrative, and I'm like, where is my place? Right? Either I give up and I say, you're right, I'll just go to pasture, meaning I just don't feel sexual anymore. I just wear my sweatsuit and I just don't care, and I, whatever. Or I have to like try to pretend that I still fit this other model and go get nipped and tucked and all the things. But where's the
I totally get that. And I think it's interesting you brought up, that was your experience as like a white girl and then women navigating it, because I think that really speaks to the intersectionality of aging too, because white femininity has always been this thing to like protect in our society. And so I can see how like as a young white little girl, it was like, oh, like just protect. And I feel like that experience, a lot of Black and little girls of color don't get that experience, because they're either sexualized at a very young age or they're looked to as caretakers at a very young age, or both, right? And so then their journey and their experience, and I can say personally, my journey and my experience was that. And so then it's like you kind of like go through the journey, like through that process at hyper speed a little bit. so then when you get to your 20s, then you're then you're like the caretaker. Like, you're just always those things, as a woman who is not white in this world. And I think as we age, I think the thing that we have in common is just like, at some point in our journeys, they might be at different times, but we get to the point where we're like, where is my place, right? Where you kind of get fed up with that narrative. You get fed up with like being put on that path outside of you choosing that path for yourself. Because if you chose that path for yourself, if you chose motherhood, if you chose to be a caretaker, if you choose that for yourself, that's totally fine. But when it's put upon you by external people and systems, then eventually you wake up one day and you're like, who the hell am I? Like, how do I define myself for myself? And when it comes to aging, I think this idea of just like beauty and usefulness, right? I think the whole usefulness thing, right? It goes back to capitalism, right? Because our bodies are a means of production to keep society going in capitalism. And once you are no longer able to bear children, then what use does your body have, right? And people with disabilities see this at every stage of their life. If you're born with a physical disability or a mental disability that doesn't allow you to be, quote unquote, a productive citizen, then society has no use for you, right? And we see that in how inaccessible a lot of things are in society, right? Like, no elevators, no ramps, right? No, hardly any accommodations, having to go out of your way for accommodations, healthcare that doesn't really support people with disabilities, or having to fight for the support that you need, which is in and of itself exhausting, right? It's almost like, what's the fucking point? And so, thinking about aging, I think I have found that like for me, for instance, I love skincare. Like, do I have a consistent, legitimate skincare routine? No, absolutely not. I'm too lazy for that. But I love skincare. And so like I try to engage or follow like skincare creators who are focused on actual care and not looking younger, right? And so like there's one skincare creator who she also owns her own skincare company, Charlotte Parler, I think is her name. And she's really good about saying, hey, we're aging. That's normal. But here's how you can moisturize, right? Like it's very much like a maintenance thing about like actually taking care of your skin and not trying to look younger, right? There's nothing in her product line that says age defying. There's nothing in her product line that says beautifying, right? Like it's a very neutral approach. And she's also really good about calling out the harms in skincare and talking about things like Palestine and how like Vaseline is like this, like Vaseline had a moment in skincare like a few years ago. And she's like, we wouldn't have Vaseline if it wasn't for indigenous populations. And they don't get any credit for that. And so I try to like keep that kind of content in front of me. And that kind of helps me be okay with like how my body is aging. I think I've come to the point where like when I turned 40, I was like, this is the best day of my life. Like, I was just so excited about turning 40. I literally woke up feeling like a completely different person. And I was just like, I'm 40 and I have no more fucks left to give. Like, I am just going to try to do what's best for me without causing any harm to anyone else. And I see it as just like a great privilege to be this age. Like I have some gray hairs. I wish I had more. Like I spent a whole year in the salon.
I'm so excited. Mine are coming in. I call them my glitter. Like they're just starting to glitter. But
yeah,
I'm going gray and just allowing what is to be.
Yeah. And my gray hairs remind me of my grandmother. And I was really close to my grandmother. And so I feel like that's a way for me to connect with her. And I think,
but Taina, so many women would hear that and freak the fuck out. Like, oh, my grandmother, right? But
yeah.
I love what you're saying, but I know for so many of us, it's so deeply internalized, the messaging, that we hear something like that and think, I'm too young, quote unquote, to look like a grandma. And what does any of that even mean, which drives me nuts?
Yeah. Well, I think because sometimes we allow what the world says about what it means to age and what it means to have these cycles of life to put us in these boxes, right? And we talked a little about we talked a little bit about this when Dee was on in the context of politics, but like the way that the world defines humanity is such a limiting view. Like I'm not talking about mindset here. I'm not talking about manifesting. Like, I'm literally talking about how the world limits us by forcing us to define ourselves in these very narrow, with these very narrow labels. And I see aging as an opportunity for reinvention. I see aging as an opportunity for expansion. And I think when you grow up afraid of change, afraid of ambiguity, afraid of the unknown, which the world conditions us to be afraid of those things. I'm not saying this is anybody's fault. I'm just saying that's the way the world conditions us to be. And if you have a traumatic childhood, that gets exacerbated, right? Because ambiguity creates stress and that can create trauma. And so when you grow up like that, like the idea of aging can feel really, really scary because you're like, what's on the other side of that? Like, I know what I was when I was younger because of what I could produce, because of how useful I was to society. But now that I'm getting older and my quote unquote usefulness, okay, has like gone away, what do I actually have to offer? And that can be a scary thing to feel, but it can also be such a beautiful place to be because you can answer that fucking question for yourself.
And it can be expansive because I hear so much of what you were saying about like, some of it, like the thing that struck me was when you said something about those who choose to become mothers. And because I was just listening, I guess, and like thinking, yes. And you were like, and then you're caretakers and you like sort of fill into that role, or you, even when you want that role. The thing that made me think was, yes, and it's so reductive. I am a mother and I'm a business owner and I'm a friend and I'm a reader and I'm creative. Like I'm a lot of things, right? But and it's not just what you were saying, but it made me think about how like you're just saying, the world reduces us into these like small little boxes of who we are. And as women, those boxes, I think, feel even smaller because we're basically either women who are looking to become moms, or we are moms, or we are grandmas, right? Like we are all like this, like that is the role that we are told that we are supposed to be looking for. And it's just so reductive. And I think that's why I can speak for the mom thing, especially me, because I became a mom very late. So when you turned 40, you were excited, you were out of fucks to give. When I turned 40, I had a baby, which is different than most folks. Not everyone. There's lots of moms in their 40s, but like, especially here in the Midwest, that's pretty unusual. And I was so focused on that I wasn't even really thinking so much about aging. Like it was just, it is all consuming. But I was going through this, instead of going through the aging grief process in my 40s, where I think maybe a lot of women do. And I say grief because I think it is grief of this like, oh, who am I? What am I? I guess I can't be that anymore. But I was going through a different grieving process that all women who become mothers, I think, experience, or all people who become parents experience, but especially I think for moms, which is like, who the hell am I? Am I only a mom? Like, the box you get put in then feels so small. Yeah. And there's so much guilt about if you don't want to just be inside that box, then there's something wrong with you. Yeah. And so there's like all of this horrible guilt and like grieving that comes along with like, I've lost all of my sense of identity and now I'm just this thing, but that doesn't feel like enough. Right. And I think for me now, getting ready to go into my 50s, getting to the point where my kid is getting old enough that he's functioning a lot more independently and I'm able to like start to recover like that period of like, oh, who am I besides a mom? Right. what I'm discovering now, in the same way I think you sort of did in your 40s, for me, it's happening now as I get closer to my 50s, is like, I am out of fucks to give. And the part that I love about that is that expansiveness.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, of like, I get to discover who am I, free from all of the constraints, all of the boxes, because now the only box that I'm left in is we don't even notice you, which it's so freeing to be like, oh, you're just put out to pasture. Well, no one's there trying to dictate my life anymore because because I'm no longer, as you said, useful. No one cares, right? They're not even paying attention to me. And when you're off without any of that stuff being thrust upon you, being forced on you, being shined on you, like, holy shit, what freedom there is there. Because now it's like, oh, I can do whatever I want. You guys aren't even paying attention anymore. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm so excited about aging because it feels expansive, honestly, for the first time in my life, where my identity feels expansive, where I get to be whatever I want. And I don't even have to worry about how people perceive it because no one's perceiving me.
Yeah.
Which, like, I think the grieving process that we go through is that feeling of like, shit, no one's perceiving me. Am I even valid or human or worthy or whatever anymore? But once you start to see the other side of that, to say like, wait a minute, no one's perceiving me.
Yeah.
Like you start to see there's freedom in it, but I do think there's grief there. And the other thing I wanted to say is to honor the privilege piece, because when you were speaking, it's not as if I don't intellectually understand that our experiences with aging are very different based on identity. I know that. But as you were talking about it, it did make me have this moment of going like, oh, experiencing the grief I'm experiencing around aging, I'm getting on the other side of it, but that I have experienced around aging is a real privilege, right? Because what it says is that I have had so much privilege around my life that it wasn't until I reached this part of life that I have to go through that grieving of like feeling again, like I'm not being perceived, like I'm not worthy, I'm not valid. Like you were saying, there are people from birth who experience that. There are people who are experiencing that at various points in their lives when they're having different disabilities or different identities that are making them now being not perceived. So I appreciate that refocus, because I think of aging as a privilege, but I also think of it as a reflection of my privilege in a different way I wasn't really emotionally resonating with until now. So thank you. That's really great to think about.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think, just putting on my coaching hat for a second, like I was just thinking about someone who might be listening to this and it's like, okay, you're talking about expansiveness and you're talking about all this possibility, but that feels really overwhelming and really scary. Like, where do I even begin? I don't know where to begin because I spent so much of my life perceiving myself through the eyes of others. How do I perceive myself for myself? And to that, I would say, if it feels really overwhelming, not knowing how you want to live the rest of your life, start with how you don't want to live the rest of your life, right? Start narrowing the expanse that way, right? And then once you eliminated that, then refocus and think about, okay, now that I know what I don't like, what I don't want to do, what I'm not interested in, what's left? Right? What's left at that point? Because I don't want to leave anyone feeling like they got gutted listening to this episode and then have absolutely no idea what to do with themselves after. Because I've experienced that before.
Sure, me too.
It's a bit disorienting.
It is. And I appreciate you bringing that up because, and I love your approach. I think that's a great way. I'll just offer another way of looking at it, which is kind of the Marie Kondoing of it, which is just examining one thing at a time. Like literally just each thing. Because this was the approach I kind of took as I went through this, because I had this experience pre-child. I was starting to go through it. Then I feel like I almost pushed pause on this grieving process and the identification process to like do the hard work of the initial years of parenting. And now I'm kind of going at the end of it again. But when I first started going through it, for me, it looked like, okay, I'm newly divorced. Everything I knew about my life is gone. I've gone through massive grief with the loss of my brother. I'm changing careers. I don't know what I want to do I don't know what anything is. Like, I felt like I had this complete fresh slate right before I turned 40. And I really just kind of took that Marie Kondo approach of like literally everything. At the time I was a vegetarian. I asked myself, do I want to be a vegetarian? What would it look like to just try meat again? Right. And now I'm back to eating meat, but I'm also now getting to a place where I'm starting to question it again. But look, it was literally everything. It was pink, honestly, was one of the things for me, which is silly, but it was like, do I hate, because I used to say I hated pink. And I was like, do I actually hate pink? Like, where did I decide I hated pink? Why did I decide I hated pink? And I was like, oh, I decided I hated pink because it felt too girly and everyone said I was supposed to be girly if I liked it. And then I was like, I started looking around going like, I actually kind of like pink. Like, if you're looking at my, like,
yeah, you got pink in your room. Yeah.
Pink. But at the time I hated pink. I had just decided I hated pink, and I was somebody who hated pink. I had decided I was a vegetarian. I'd been a vegetarian for 17 years. It's just who I was. So all these like pieces of me that I had decided were me, I just sort of picked up like Marie Kondo would have you do and say like, does this still spark joy?
Yeah.
And if it didn't, I'd be like, well then why am I forcing myself into this box? Because I at one point in my life decided that was a thing about me. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just continued to kind of just do that with each little part of my life and picking one little thing at a time instead of feeling like I had to just completely define myself. It was just more like this process. I guess it's sort of what you're saying about like what I don't like, but it was also looking at what I did like and asking me, is this still true for me? Does this still spark joy? Do I still like this thing? Each little piece until I kind of started to paint this whole new picture. And it's funny because now a little over a decade later, 15 years later, I look at myself and think, wow, there are some things that are still very much true. So much that's just so radically different. When I finally was able to get to the place for the first time in my life to say, who am I? What do I want? What do I like? If I don't allow anyone else to dictate it, what are those things? And it is overwhelming, but I do also think it's exciting. If you can allow yourself to just say, I don't have to have it all figured out today, like you were saying.
Yeah. There's no urgency to figure it out. Just let it take the time that it's going to take. I want to offer an alternative to someone who was in fashion. And then as they aged, they turned around and just kind of went, wow, I had it all wrong back then. And I'm in a different place now.
Ooh, who's that?
Do you remember the show, What Not to Wear?
Oh, yeah.
Stacey London.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to post somewhere if I can find it. My friend Daisy, who I mentioned, wrote something about that. And I'm interested because I feel like she maybe still had some issues with Stacey. So I'll be interested to see. But you feel like she's done a good job of repenting? Because she needed to.
I haven't done a deep dive into her stuff, but I know that she has publicly admitted, like in various interviews, about how recognizing the harm that show caused, and how it was like steeped in like diet culture and weight stigma and all of that. And so I started following her on Instagram a few years ago because I came across her Instagram through another Instagram called Chronicon. And it's a community for people who have chronic issues. And Stacey has a chronic health issue. And so she spoke at one of the Chronicons. And that's how I was like, oh, what has she been up to? And I just kind of followed her and have read a little bit about her. So I haven't done a whole dive, but I know it's different from what Tyra Banks has given us. So,
well, and somebody else I'll mention is Paulina Poroskova. I hate that these are both white women we're mentioning, but she was a supermodel, and her focus now is all about aging and aging in a more natural way, meaning here's what my face looks like if I don't do any surgery to it. That said, I also still feel like, and I think, no one's perfect. So that's part of this, right? Yeah. Is that she's also still projecting a particular way of
aging,
looking beautiful, which is a very thin model. And it's her fault. I mean, I don't know if it's her fault, but maybe she's just naturally, I would imagine, that shape, because usually that's the case with these supermodels. They just happen to have those genetics that make their bodies lean. But so it's not her fault that she's projecting that, but also I would like her to do a little more, being more expansive of like talking about all body types. But and Justine Bateman's another one who wrote a book called Face and is talking about aging and naturally showing up as women and what that does in Hollywood, because men are allowed to have their faces age more naturally than women. There are men who do plastic surgery, so I'm not pretending like there aren't. But let's be honest, the difference between men's longevity without plastic surgery and women's longevity without plastic surgery is remarkable.
Yeah.
And so, and then just to end it, whatever we need to, because I could go aging all day because it's, what I'm living through. But the other thing is just this like idea of what age you look. I posted something on Threads about that. I find it so annoying of like, oh, you don't look 50. And it's like, no, I look exactly like I look 49. Yeah. This is what 49 looks like on me. 49 on someone else looks a different way, but it's what 49 is. So I can't look a different age than what I am. And that idea, and I really hate when people use that as a compliment, right? In the same way, we need to stop saying like, oh, you look thinner. Congratulations. Where we don't know why that's happening. If that's a good thing, if that's the thing they want. We need to stop talking to people and saying, you look great for your age, or you don't look that age, or, any of those kinds of things. Those aren't compliments, people, and they're not helpful. So we got to stop that. We do it to each other as women, but like just on the whole, like that's not
they're still steeped in having this idea of what that age is supposed to look like, right? You're supposed to look a certain way, and so it can seem like a compliment, but it's really not. Right. The last thing I want to say about the Tyra thing too is like I acknowledge like the intersectionality of her experience as a Black woman in the modeling industry, in the fashion industry that is dominated by the white gaze. Right. And I not the gaze like homosexual, like gaze, like you're looking like
G-A-Z-E, gaze.
G-A-Z-E. Yeah. So and her being, a Black woman who has a very specific body type, that most Black women have, and so not all Black women, but surely some of them. And so I understand, that I don't understand what her struggle was like. I understand that there was a struggle there. And so, however, that does not excuse the harm. And so this is where the both and comes into play, right? Like, yes, it is true that she was probably harmed and is continually being harmed by the industry, but it can also be true that she is also perpetuating that harm.
Right. And the same way Janice Dickinson was harmed by the male gaze and then perpetuated that. And the same way my mom, love you, mom, was harmed by the male gaze and perpetuated that with me, right? Like we get that, but it also doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean that we have to, like in the case of my mom, I can forgive that and understand that. And I get to say, I'm not going to perpetuate that, continue that cycle. Yeah. Right. And so I hope that's where Tyra is. I hope that she has learned that because again, that intersectionality piece, she was dealing with not just the male gaze, but the white gaze. The white gaze, So they're both there. And I can't imagine how difficult and challenging that was. And especially in the time when she was, and thinking even farther back, going to like Iman and some of the women who came before her and how challenging that had to be. So like we can understand and appreciate that and say, and Tyra, now you're 50. And I love that you showed up, but what I would like more is for you to be on a tear talking about this. Yeah. Not just an apology tour, but more of an acknowledgement and learning and growth tour. And now showing up full-throatedly, full-chestedly saying, that was wrong. Yeah. And I don't have to hate myself for it because I can understand how I got here. And here's what I want to do now. Yeah. Right. And I don't think Victoria's Secret is the way to do it.
No. So one last question that I have for you and for our listeners that I just want to end with, and we obviously won't have time to like really discuss this, but I just want a quick response from you, Becky. And then if you're listening or watching, leave us a comment or drop us an email. So a few weeks ago, I was watching CBS News and they had this self-help guru on who wrote this book. I forgot what the name of the book is, but she kind of blew up on TikTok and that's how she got the book deal. Her name is Kayla Shaheen. And she is 25 years old, or was at the time of the interview. And I found myself thinking, you're kind of young to be kind of labeled, one, a guru, but two, a self-help guru. And then I was like, am I being ageist here? Or is there some truth to the idea that someone who labels themselves as a self-help guru should probably be a little bit older? I don't know. To me, it kind of felt like people who just get married and have been married for like 6 months and then are dishing out marriage advice. And it's like, you haven't even hit the hard part yet.
Exactly.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, just look, she's published by Simon & Schuster, so that's a big deal. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's not self-publishing.
She's got a couple of journals. They're journals. So, Lucky Girl Journal, Book of Shadow Work, and 369 Journal, whatever that is. So it's journaling, and it sounds like some shadow work stuff, and I find that very interesting. I have no idea if she's a therapist. So even beyond the age piece, there's that part of me going, this is very interesting. I don't know. It's a really good question and one to ponder, because my initial reaction is, you're 25. Don't tell me about life advice. But then again, somebody at 100 could be telling me at 50, fuck you. You don't know about life advice.
Yeah.
They're right and they're wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Like, because you don't know. I don't have another 50 years worth of wisdom, of lived experience. But also I know what it looks like to be 50 or 100 and starting to get really stuck in your ways, to start to get more rigid, right? To lose some of the inquisitivity and curiosity and expansiveness that we can have when you were young. So like, I think it's about the end, like everything else. Right? I think what's important to me is for anyone who's doing any of this kind of work, is it grounded in acknowledging those things? Is she acknowledging? I have no idea because I don't know her, but is she acknowledging, hey, I'm 25. This is what I know. These are the things I've learned. This is where I'm at. This is my worldview. I want to share that. Or is it what I suspect, because it's too often what it is, hey, I know everything and you should listen to me. Right? Those are two very different things. So I guess it's a both and. And to me, it's more about the individual and how they show up doing it.
Yeah. She did not acknowledge her age in the interview.
I find that very problematic.
Yeah.
I think that's clearly an elephant in the room. I have a feeling for most people who, unless they're 12, are watching that going, wait a minute, you're 25. What do you know about life? And I'm not to say that she doesn't know. She may have God knows you can have a lot of trauma by the time you're 25, that maybe you've done a lot of extensive work and you've lived 2 lifetimes in that time. Like, you know what I mean? So I do think that's possible, but I do think it requires acknowledging your lived experience.
Yeah. I think I would have felt differently if she would have said, or she was being labeled or labeling herself as the self-help guru for 20-somethings. Because then that seems reasonable, right? And she also has like all this psychobabble going on, and
that bothers me more.
Yeah, and I went to her website and I was like, "What are her credentials?" And it was like, "Oh, she's trained in certain things," but it never said that she's like right. It never says that she like has a degree or a certificate or something like that. And so I'm just like, where is this coming from then?
And that is, coming from me as somebody who's a coach and has journalism degrees, like I fully get that. And I do think I have a lot that I can offer to people, and it's deeply critical. And this is where I think you and I both agree in how we show up as feminists doing this work, and what it means to be an intersectional feminist showing up in any workspace is to honor those realities, to honor the lived experience, what you know and what you don't know, how you can and how you can't help. I don't know that you're saying she's calling herself a guru, but anyone calling themselves a guru is an immediate red flag for me.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
So, regardless of age or anything else, but also white girls, white women in general. And as a white woman, I say this, I'm always have my red flag up right away. Anything you're doing in any space, but especially self-help, until I start to see some understanding around values and around actual learning. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to see a certification. I don't have to see a university credential, because I also know the bullshit that's involved in that.
Absolutely.
Right? But if you can't tell me you've read some Audre Lorde, if you can't tell me you've read some Bell Hooks, if you can't tell me, that you have some understanding of like the Combahee Collective, like, River Collective, you don't have some of these. Like, if I can't have a conversation with you about some of this, and you have no real understanding of these, especially Black feminists who have taught us, that scares me.
Yeah.
Okay, we've gone long. Every time, folks, we think we're going to try to keep it to under 45 minutes, and every time we end up closer to like 50, 55 minutes. So we should just acknowledge that.
Yeah, we should just acknowledge it. That's just where we are.
Then so okay. Well, thank you all for being here, and we wanted to let you know, by the way, that on November, if you're listening to this when it comes out, on November 6th, Wednesday, November 6th, 10:30 a.m. Central, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, I can't give you any more time zones than that. We're going to have a live discussion on YouTube. So if you don't yet follow us on YouTube, please do. And I think there's a little bell you click that will give you notices of things like when we go live. But I'm just giving you a heads up now. We'll talk a little bit more about it in our next episodes. But we are going to be doing a live conversation post-election to talk about whatever happens, everyone. Yeah. So we'll either be celebrating, depressed, or what I think is more likely, just waiting. About how we're all feeling. And we're going to have a special guest who's going to come in and do some meditation for us as well to help us stay grounded. Yeah. So mark your calendar. Join us
November 6th. November 6th.
And don't forget to vote on November 5th. If you're in America, if you're in the U.S., vote.
Please
if you
vote.
Have to save through early voting, make sure you vote. Because if you're listening to us, my guess is that means you're not going to be voting for Trump, and any non-vote for Trump is a vote in the right direction. So
just make a plan. Make a plan.
We'll see you on the 6th. Thanks, Taina.
Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time. And if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast. But truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.